Peace be upon you and God's mercy. In the name of God, and praise be to God, and prayers and peace be upon the messenger of God and upon his family and companions and those who follow him. O God, there is nothing easy except what you make easy, and you make sorrow easy if you will. O God, teach us what benefits us and benefit us with what you have taught us, and increase us in knowledge. O God, make all our work purely for your noble countenance, and do not let anyone else have anything in it, O Lord of the worlds. Welcome, dear friends, may you be blessed and your steps be blessed, and may you be granted a place in paradise. We ask God, the blessed and exalted, who has gathered us in obedience to him, to gather us in his paradise, the abode of his mercy and the home of his honor. This is the 65th session of the prophetic biography. Upon its owner be the best of prayers and peace. Before we begin this session, 2 points must be emphasized. The first is that we must always remind you of the plight of our brothers in Gaza, who are suffering greatly from hardship, hunger, and killing. They have been conspired against by those near and far, allies and enemies alike, and they have no one left but God. God is sufficient as a guardian, and God is sufficient as a helper. So, I remind myself and you to frequently remind ourselves and others of our duty towards the people of Gaza. As we mentioned, the weakest of faith is donating money, which is jihad with money. I say donating, but it is jihad with money, and it is a right our brothers have upon us. The second is supplication, that they should always be a part of our supplications in every prostration and in places where supplications are answered. By places where supplications are answered, I mean the places and situations where supplications are answered, meaning in times of blessing and in blessed places, and this is a message to our brothers in the Holy Land, in Mecca, in Medina, and in other mosques, and also by boycotting the enemies of God and their products as much as we can and to the best of our ability, and by urging, spreading, and calling for this. This is the first warning. As for the second warning, we urge, support, and endorse every effort to aid our brothers in Gaza, especially what happened this past week, whether it be the 2 young men in Egypt at the Seerah police station in Helwan. We ask God Almighty to protect them if they are alive, and to accept them among the martyrs if they were martyred under torture, as some news reports indicate. Likewise, the movement abroad, any action that contributes to shaking and overthrowing these regimes is in reality beneficial to the people of Palestine. We resume our discussion of the Prophet's biography, and we had reached in the previous session the conclusion of the non-military events that occurred in the second year of the Hijra, and we mentioned 11 events in the previous session and the one before. Last, we discussed 11 non-military events in the Prophet's biography during the second year of the Hijra. Does anyone remember any of them? The group that diligently records and writes. Fasting, yes, Aisha's. Marriage to Aisha, yes. The marriage of Ali to Fatima, yes. Ali's will and poison, no. This isn't an event. I'm talking about the death of Uthman, the death of Uthman ibn Madun, yes. Okay, zakat and zakat al-fitr, yes. Okay, pray for the Prophet. Young men, pray for the Prophet. Knowledge, if not studied, is forgotten, and if it's forgotten, there's no need to spend time and effort on it. It's true that gatherings of knowledge are blessed, angels descend upon them, and mercy envelops them, and tranquility surrounds them. But knowledge without studying, without recalling, and without commitment is lost, yes. So, a gathering of knowledge without commitment is considered a
يعتبر مجلس العلم بدون تعهد لما قيل فيه من تضييع الوقت والجهد. تمام. فنحن ذكرنا
waste of time and effort.
أسباب
Yes,
تحويل القبلة
we
ومن
mentioned
بينها
after the
الله
incident of the conversion, the change of the Qibla, and the events
حديث
following Ashura. We mentioned that several laws were revealed,
ومنها
including
ذكرنا أن
fasting,
الله
Ramadan, Zakat al-Fitr, the
تشريع
first
الزكاة
Eid al-Adha, the
وتحويل
legislation of
القبلة
Zakat, the
وذكرنا بناء النبي بعائشة
first
وذكرنا
Eid al-Fitr, the Prophet's marriage to
وذكرنا
Aisha, the marriage of Sayyid, and
اعتكاف
itikaf
النصف
seclusion in the mosque for
وفاة
worship.
سيدنا عثمان
These are among the events witnessed by the Muslims. We also mention the death of
طيب
Uthman ibn Madun, the emergence of
وذكرنا
hypocrisy in
بالملي
Medina, and the death of
وفاة رقية بنت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. طيب
Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet,
الآن
peace and blessings
نريد
be
أن
upon him.
نقف
Now
وقفة
we need to
سريعة
pause
إن شاء الله
briefly,
نقول
God willing, to
عن
reflect on
هذه
these events that occurred in
هذه
the
السنة
second year of the
الهجرية.
Hijrah. As you have seen, the
سنة
second year of the Hijrah was a
كما
year
رأيتم
of
الآن هي سنة التكاليف الكثيرة. سنة التكاليف الكثيرة. يعني شوفوا نحن ذكرنا فيها تحويل القبلة
numerous
وفيها صوم
obligations. We
عاشوراء
mentioned the change of
وصوم
the Qibla, the
عاشوراء
fast of
وصيام
Ashura, which
رمضان
was
وفيها
later
التكاليف
abrogated by the
الدنيوية
fast of
والأخروية
Ramadan, Zakat
وفيها
al-Fitr, Zakat in
العقوبات
general, itikaf during
الكافية
Ramadan, and the first Eid
كأول
al-Adha, which is the
والهدي.
sacrificial offering. These
هذه
obligations were
التكاليف
revealed sequentially
تترى
in the
نزلت تترى في السنة الثانية للهجرة. هذا
second year of the Hijrah. This
الفارق
illustrates the
بين
difference between the
مرحلة
establishment
إقامة
of the
الدولة
state and the
ومرحلة
propagation of Islam are
البعث.
crucial. Young people, as we mentioned before, if you pick
هذا
up any
أمر
book
مهم يا
on the
شباب.
Prophet's biography, any book on the
ذكرنا أن
Prophet's
دائرة
biography,
العبادات
as we
في
said,
أي
the
كتاب في
Prophet's
السيرة
biography
النبوية
is divided
أي
into
كتاب
three
في السيرة
parts:
النبوية
the
أي
life
كتاب
of
في
the
السيرة
Prophet,
النبوية
peace and
هو
blessings be upon him,
قسم حياة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قبل البعثة.
before his mission, which lasted
حياة النبي
40
قبل البعثة
years, the Meccan
أو قبل
period, which
البعثة
lasted 13 years, and the
والمرحلة
Medinan
المكية
period,
كام
which
سنة
lasted 10 years, that makes
والمرحلة
40
المكية كام
years,
سنة
13 years, and 10 years,
هي 40
respectively.
سنة
However, in any book on
35
the
سنة.
Prophet's biography, you will
كل
find that the
أحداث السيرة
events in the
النبوية
first 10
ستجد إنه الأحداث في ال10 سنوات أكبر من الأحداث في ال13 سنة وفي
years
ال53
are
سنة
greater than those in the first 13
وأحداث
years,
ال
and,
13
even in the
سنة
first
أكبر من
53
أحداث
years,
ال40
the
سنة.
events in the first 13 years are greater than those in the
قيام
first
دولة
40
الإسلام
years. The establishment of the
مرحلة
Islamic
سابقة
State was a
أول
pivotal stage
اجتماع
in the
إسلامي
development of
وفي
Muslim
مسار الأمة
society and in the
الإسلامية
spread of the
في كافة
Islamic call.
الأهداف
There were many events, because a state was
من إقامة
established,
الدولة
and
فلذلك صارت تنزيل الأحكام قبل ذلك كان المسلمون
therefore
ضعفاء
rulings were
وضعفاء
revealed. Before that, Muslims
كانوا
were
لا
weak and
يستطيعون
oppressed.
أن
They could only
يقيموا
perform the
إلا
obligatory
الفروض
acts of
الفردية
worship. The
التي
individual
تحدد
obligations were
الأشخاص.
incumbent upon them as
لكن الآن لما
individuals. But
قامت
now
الدولة
that the state has
صارت
been
هناك
established, there are
واجبات
general
عامة
obligations for the
لجميع
Muslim
المسلمين.
community, Islam
فالإسلام لا يحيا بدون دولة. الإسلام دين من
cannot
طبيعته
exist without
أنه
a
لا
state.
يحيا بدون دولة.
Islam, by its
الإسلام
very
بدون
nature,
دولة
cannot exist without a
دين
state.
ناقص.
Islam, without a state, is an
يعتبر
incomplete
ركن
religion. The
ركينا
state is a
من الإسلام
fundamental pillar of Islam and
رأسا
an
ركينا
essential
في الإسلام.
principle of Islam. Therefore, you will
ولذلك
find that the lives of
ستجد
Muslims,
أن
as you see
حياة
from
المسلمين كما ترون من هذه التكاليف كلها لم تنزل إلا
these
بعد إقامة
obligations were not
الإسلام.
revealed until after the
تمام؟
Muslims had a
هذا هو
state. This
الأمر
is
الأول.
the
الأمر
first
الثاني
point. The second point is,
هذه
these laws that
الشرائع
were
الدينية يا
revealed.
شباب
Oh, the chapter on
الشرائع
laws
في
that were
الإسلام
revealed are these laws of
هذه
action or
الشرائع
laws of abstention,
بفعل
that is, are
تشرع ترك.
Muslims told to do something or
يعني يقال للمسلمين افعلوا أم يقال للمسلمين لا تفعلوا؟ ها؟
not to do something?
افعلوا.
Yes, they are laws of
بالفعل
action, not laws of
الشرائع
abstention. Even
ترك.
fasting, which could be
حتى
considered a
الصيام
law of
اللي هو
abstention, is
ترك
only relevant in the month
الطاعات
of
وترك
Ramadan and what
المحرمات
accompanies it.
إلا
There
إن شهر
is action
رمضان
involved in
الكريم
increasing the
كان فيه
recitation of the
فعل
Quran,
كبير
in
كقراءة
praying at
القرآن
night, and
وفي
in
قيام الليل
seclusion.
وفي
So, the
الاعتكاف.
essence of
فالأصل في الشرائع أنها شرائع فعل وليست
the
شرائع
laws is that they are laws of action, not laws of
لو
abstention.
تتذكرون
Do you remember what the pledge of
كان
Islam was
شرع
based on
الإسلام ماذا؟
action or abstention? Does anyone
فعل أم
remember
عدم؟
what the terms of the pledge of Islam were, which is the first
حد
pledge
فيكم
of
فاكر ما
Aqaba?
هي
We called it the
بيعة
pledge of
النساء؟
women. Some scholars called it the
اللي هي
pledge
بيعة
of
العقبة الأولى التي سميناها بيعة النساء سماها بعض العلماء يعني بيعة النساء اللي هو مذكورة في آخر سورة الممتحنة
women, which is
يا
mentioned
أيها
at the end of
النبي إذا
Surah
جاءك المؤمنات
Al-Mumtahana.
يبايعنك
O
على أن
Prophet, when
لا
believing women come
يشركن
to you
بالله
pledging
شيئا ولا
allegiance
يسرقن
to
ولا
you
يزنين
that
ولا
they will
يقتلن
not
أولادهن
associate
ولا
anything with
يأتين
Allah,
بأربعة
nor steal, nor commit adultery, nor kill their children, nor bring forth falsehood which they have fabricated between their hands and feet, nor disobey you in what is right. These are laws of action, not abstention. Abstention is laws of action. This is the difference between the pre-state stage and the post-state stage. In a non-Muslim society, most of what is required of a person in reality is abstention because he lives in a society that is already oppressive. Most of what a person struggles within a non-Muslim society is abstention, but when an Islamic state is established, or in a weak Muslim society when we try to lift people from misguidance to guidance, what is most required of people from the Muslim?
فأغلب ما يطلب من الناس من المسلم هو إيه؟ الفعل.
Action is key, and this is a precious insight that many people overlook in the matter of enjoining good and forbidding evil. You find that most preachers and orators forbid evil without enjoining good. As Ibn Taymiyyah, may God have mercy on him, said,
وكما يقول ابن تيمية رحمه الله يقول والنفوس إنما خلقت لتعمل لم تخلق
souls were created to
لتلهي.
act, not to remain idle. In reality, a Muslim's faith cannot be sound, nor can the repentance of the guided be complete unless they occupy themselves and their time with what they do,
بما يفعله وليس فقط بما يتركه.
not just what they refrain from. This is a precious insight. Look, no matter how much a person resists their desires, no matter how much they strive to break free from the deviations of their current reality, this abstinence will not be complete unless they occupy themselves with good deeds. A
إلا إذا شغل نفسه بفعل خير. يعني الإنسان هيجتهد في غض البصر.
person may strive to lower their gaze, strive to earn lawful money, strive to avoid listening to forbidden things, but their efforts will not be successful unless they occupy themselves and their time with good deeds. That is why the principle of enjoining good precedes the principle of forbidding evil. It is said, enjoining good and forbidding evil, not forbidding evil and enjoining good. And that is why, one point that deserves attention and elaboration is the slogan some people raise, purification before purification. This is inaccurate, my friends. The heart cannot truly be free from its current state unless it is infiltrated by goodness. If a person doesn't occupy themselves with righteous deeds, with good company, and with good works, their soul is likely to tempt them towards sin. Therefore, the righteous have said, if you don't occupy your soul with truth, it will occupy you with falsehood. The first thing a repentant or guided person is commanded to do is to occupy themselves with good and virtuous acts, to avoid wrongdoing. Now, if we move from the individual level to the
إذا نقلنا من المستوى الفردي إلى المستوى الجماعي الجماعة المسلمة نجد أن
collective level of the Muslim community, we find that, after the establishment of their Islamic state, these Muslims became preoccupied with performing good deeds and acts of obedience. I think this is clear, isn't it? A third point, we mentioned the first point. Does anyone remember the difference between the pre-state and post-state phases? The post-state phase is a pivotal one where rulings are revealed, implemented, and activity increases. Muslims, in the post-state stage, are much more active than those in the pre-state stage. The state is the origin and pillar of Islam. The second observation, we said that most of these laws are laws of action and not laws of protection. The third observation, here, pay attention to the fact that jihad was legislated before zakat and fasting were legislated before alcohol was prohibited, before the hijab was imposed, and
صح ولا
before
لا؟
usury was prohibited. Is that
الجهاد
correct or
بدأ
not? Jihad began at the end of the first year of the Hijra. Permission was given to those who fought because they were wronged, and we mentioned that. The Prophet went out in raids, and we mentioned in the last session that our master Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib used to
كان يشرب الخمر وسكر فقام
drink wine
بالمصيبة
and
نزل
became
عليه
drunk, so he
سيدنا
did a
علي بن
calamity
أبي
that befell
فاكر
our master Ali, who remembers
قتل
killing the
الجملين
2 camels. Our master Hamza, this one died before alcohol was forbidden, and yet he attained the rank of the master of
ومع
martyrs,
ذلك
the
صار في
essence
مرتبة
of
إيه؟ سيد الشهداء. تمام. الجهاد يعني
jihad. Is that this
الفكرة
matter
إن
should be
هو
considered? How
جهاد
can
فرض
jihad be legislated before the rest of the pillars
الجهاد.
of Islam? We still don't have
ومن
zakat,
شرع
fasting, or
بقية
hajj.
أركان
All that was
الإسلام
obligatory
صوم
for
وحج
Muslims
لا
was the
زكاة
declaration of
ولا
faith, there
صيام
is no
ولا
God
حج.
but God,
كل
and
هذه
the
المفروض على
5
المسلمين
daily
شهادة أن لا
prayers
إله
which were
إلا الله
prescribed during the
وأن
Isra and
محمد
Miraj
رسول الله
night journey and
التي ذكرت
ascension.
في الإسراء والمعراج. ليس كذلك؟ من
Who can
يفسر لنا
explain
هذا؟
this to us, young men?
ما
What
الحكمة
is the
من
wisdom
فرض
behind
أو من تشريع
imposing or
الجهاد
legislating jihad
قبل
before
أن
the
يفرض
major
حقوق
principles of
الإسلام
Islam, its
وأركانه؟
pillars,
الزكاة
zakat and
والصيام.
fasting, were established? Okay, I'll let it
ماشي.
slide. So the meaning is
فعلا
correct, but it
يعني أنت
needs further
المعنى صح.
explanation. Providing the environment? Yes, tell me, our master. Providing the environment. Why? Provide the environment? These
توفير البيئة
instructions are
للمسلمين.
for the strength of the state. I can't hear.
مش سامع يا مولانا. والله يعني صح إلا 5 بصراحة، يعني ما إجابة صحيحة إلا 5 دقايق بس. الله. شُفت
You are
هذه
master, so stimulating the environment
الإجابة
means
واحدة صح.
establishing the state by force and stability, and God knows best, except for 5 honestly. So the answer is correct except for 5
صلّوا على النبي
minutes.
صلى الله عليه
What?
وسلم.
No
إحنا
intelligence, no
كمسلمين
fasting. God, look,
تكلمنا
did you
عن
see this? This is the
الجهاد
phrase
وشرع
I want to
الجهاد.
hear. Pray for the Prophet.
تمام.
Increase your
وذكرنا
prayers upon the
إن
Prophet. Do you remember when we talked about the
الدولة
beginning of the
الإسلامية
migration to
كلها
Medina? We
أُسست
mentioned that
بالتدرج.
establishing the Islamic State was a
إقامة
gradual process. It was a
أقوى ما يمكن
forceful and rapid
وأسرع ما يمكن
establishment,
للإنسان
seizing
أن
every
يصل إليها
available
مهما
opportunity, no
كان
matter how
أقصى المسافة
impossible
وقبل
it
مستواه.
seemed. We also
وكانت
mentioned that the
الأحوال التي
conditions in
تدهور قبل أن
Medina
يخرج
before the
إليها
Prophet,
النبي صلى الله
peace
عليه
and
وسلم
blessings be
أحوال
upon him,
تعكس
arrived, were extremely
حتى
dire.
لو
If
عرضت
you
على
presented this
أي
to any
واحد من
contemporary Islamic
المفكرين
thinker, they would
الإسلاميين
tell you
المعاصرين هيقول لك إيه، هذه الأرض ولا هذه البلد لا تصلح لإقامة
that this
الدولة
land and
الإسلامية.
this country were unsuitable for establishing
لكن
an Islamic state.
تطبيق
However, the
الشريعة
implementation of Sharia
بالكفاءة
law is
هو
what
الذي
allows for
يسبب
gradualism.
التدرج.
Muslims would continue to
يعني
engage in usury
سيظل
until the
المسلمون
ninth
يتعاملون
year
معها
after the
باستمرار
establishment of the
ساعات
state, and
الأحوال
Muslim
اليومية.
women would remain unveiled until
ستظل
the
المسلمات بغير حجاب إلى السنة الخامسة بعد قيام الدولة. تمام.
5th year after its
فإقامة
establishment.
الدولة
So,
أمر
establishing the state isn't a
تستطيع
gradual
بلوغه
process, it's
بخطوة
an
وأن تصرفه
opportunity that must be
في
seized as soon as
أقرب
possible and with all
وأسرع
possible
الطرق
energy.
الممكنة.
But implementing
لكن
the
تنفيذ
detailed laws of
الشريعة
Islam
الإسلامية
is what
بسهولة
allows
هو
for
الذي يجب
gradualism.
أن
Now, what
يكون
does
فيه التدرج. طيب، ما علاقة هذا بالذي نقوله الآن؟ لولا
this
الجهاد
have to do with what we're
ما كان
saying
يمكن
now?
أن
If it
تقوم
weren't
دولة
for
إسلامية في المدينة.
jihad, an Islamic state could not have been established in the
الدول
first place.
تحرس بالجهاد. الدول
States
تقوم
are
بالجهاد
established through jihad.
يحرسون في
We have
كذا قبيلة
discussed this in detail
وتحرس بالجهاد.
previously.
لولا
Without
الجهاد
jihad, there could
ما
be no
كان يمكن أن
society
يوجد
upon which
مجتمع
Islamic law could be
يصح
applied.
أن تنزل
Therefore, my
عليه
friends, and this, by the
الأحكام.
way, corrects.
فلذلك يا جماعة، وهذا بالمناسبة يصحح مفاهيمنا في أمور كثيرة، منها إنه الجهاد
Our
هذا
understanding of many things,
يقوم
including that
الجهاد
this
هنا
jihad is undertaken by the
يقوم
entire
حتى
Muslim
قبل أن
community.
يكن
This jihad is the jihad of the
مستقيما
entire Muslim
ولم يكن
community,
ملتزما
undertaken
ولم يكن
even by those
راضيا
who are
ولم
not
يكن
righteous,
عارفا.
committed, or obedient.
يعني
Jihad
هذه
is a state of the
الذين
entire
كانوا في
Muslim
المسلمين
community. This means that during times of Muslim weakness,
حقائق
a
ضلالة
misguided
ليس
statement emerged. Not all who held it were
كلها
misguided,
من
but some said it
الضالين،
under
ولكن
pressure, some said it during times of weakness.
بعضهم
That one
قالها
cannot
في
reach
أزمنة
jihad before
الضعف،
one can wage jihad against.
إنه لا يمكن أن تصل إلى الجهاد قبل أن تستطيع أن تجاهد نفسك؟ إزاي ممكن تجاهد وأنت ما بتقومش الليل؟
Oneself, how
إزاي
can one
ممكن
wage
تجاهد
jihad if
وأنت
one does
بتحافظ
not
على
pray
ورد
at night?
القرآن؟
How can one wage jihad if one does not
وتحافظ
maintain
على
one's daily Quranic recitation? How can one wage jihad if one does not maintain one's daily Quranic recitation? This is incorrect, my friends. The essence of jihad is that it is the work of the entire Muslim community in which the religious and the non-religious participate. Undoubtedly, it is the one who has perfected the religion who has struggled against his own desires, who maintains his night prayers and who maintains his daily Quranic recitation that is truly jihad. The Quran is closer to the path of jihad than righteousness, and undoubtedly the disobedient may also be involved in it. They may be involved in jihad due to some form of obstruction, some form of madness, some form of harm, and some form of weakness. However, the jihad of the nation should not be halted, especially in times of defense when the entire nation is occupied. The enemy has occupied us, invaded us, entered our homes, and killed us. Then we should not prevent jihad until a man has completed his observance of the daily recitations, his observance of the supererogatory prayers, and his struggle against his own desires. Here you see people who have entered into jihad and fought, some of whom have been martyred and entered paradise, yet among them are many manifestations of pre-Islamic ignorance, such as drinking alcohol, engaging in usury, not wearing the hijab, and so on. Jihad is fundamental in the practical reality of establishing states, specifically, and it precedes people's adherence to all the revealed laws. This matter should not be postponed, especially in times of
تأجيل هذا الأمر خصوصا في أزمنة الدفع التي نحن فيها وفي أزمنة الاستضعاف التي نحن فيها.
defense like these and in
لن
times of weakness
يخبركم
like these.
خبرا
Furthermore,
يفيد
I tell you
عنه
based on
أفضل
what I have
الكلام
witnessed on
وليس
the
الكلام
ground, not
النظري.
theoretical talk, that when revolutions occurred, you found among those who were not
ونجد
religiously
من
observant
غير
more
من غير
courage, boldness,
المسلمين
bravery, and
شجاعة
self-sacrifice than
وإقدام
among the religiously
وبسالة
observant.
وفداء
Many of
أكثر من كثير من هؤلاء الملتزمين. لماذا؟ العيب في الالتزام مؤكد
these
إن العيب شيء،
so-called committed people. Why is the fault in commitment
ولكن
itself? Certainly, not in
الالتزام
commitment, but rather in the reality of a
المستضعفين
commitment that arose in marginalized
المظلومين
mosques and hidden
المختطفين.
homes, a commitment that didn't want to
يريد
resist tyranny, a commitment that
المقيم
was born with the
بأمراض
diseases of
الطغيان.
tyranny. So, when the moment of confrontation came,
فلما
they
جاءت
lacked the
رهبة المواجهة لم تكن عنده الاستعدادات النفسية لكي يواجه، بل وقف بعض أهل
psychological readiness to
العلم
face it.
ومنسوبي العلم
Instead, some
والدعوة
so-called
لكي
scholars,
يدفعوا
claiming to be scholars and
سريانهم
preachers, stood in the
ويرشدوهم
way, pushing
عن
people
محك
away,
الجادة
forbidding them and
التي
turning them
إلى
back from a
أن
golden
يغيروا
opportunity to
أحوالهم
change
ويصلحوا
their
بلادهم.
circumstances and reform their countries. This is because it is
لأنه
a
التزام
sick
مريض،
commitment, a
التزام
virus that
نجس.
has been infected by
دفع
the
إليه
virus of
فيروس
power, the
السلطة
virus of
وفيروس
tyranny.
الطغيان.
Thus, a
فجاءت
domesticated religion arose, a religion that
مين اللي
coexists
عايش
with
مع
tyranny.
الطغيان؟
When the opportunity came,
لما
it
جاء
couldn't
الرسول صلى الله
unleash
عليه
the
وسلم يريد
power of
أن
religion while those who were on their
يفرض
natural path, those who
طائفتين،
had
بينما كان الناس الذين على الفطرة اللي هم لم يتلقوا الدين المفيروس ده كانوا
and
أحسن
received this
استجابة
virused
وأحسن استجابة
religion,
في هذه اللحظة.
responded better and acted better at that moment.
التعليم
Poisoned
نفسه
education
خير
is better than
منه الجهاد.
ignorance. There is no doubt
يعني لا
that
شك أن
knowledge is
العلم خير
better
من
than
الجهل،
ignorance, but
لكن
poisoned
العلم مسموم
education
به،
is worse than
الجهل
ignorance.
خير
You
منه.
know, there is a saying in Al-Jurjani's
تعرفون
verses, I
في رواية
have
الجرجاني وهو يقول: ولم أقض حق العلم إن كنت كلما بدا طمع
not fulfilled the right of
صيرته.
knowledge if every time greed appeared I
فأشق
made it my own.
قياسا
I toil for it,
وتفنيه
planting it, and
إيجادا
reaping its
ليس
humiliation.
اتباع
If
الجهل
following
كان
ignorance were
أحسن.
wiser, then it would be wiser.
لو
If
إن
only the
العالم
scholar would
بيتعلم
learn knowledge. But he is responsive to
ولكن
every situation, responsive to
مستجيب
tyranny,
لكل
responsive
الأوضاع،
to greed.
مستجيب
I
للطغيان،
have
مستجيب للمطامع. ولم
not
أقض
fulfilled
حق
the right of
العلم إن
knowledge if
كنت
every time greed
كلما
appears I
بدا
make it a
طمع
ladder for myself. That is why
صيرته
he asks you,
سلما.
O Sheikh, is this matter permissible or forbidden? He
ولذلك
asks
يقول
you,
لك
do you want it permissible or
فلان
forbidden?
الشيخ
Because
المفروض
he has
عليه
the verse, he
رضوان
has the ability to make it
يفتح هذا
permissible,
المحرم،
and he has the ability to
يبقى هو
make it
عنده
forbidden.
إيه؟ عنده
These are real
الإمكانية يخليه
facts.
حلال وعنده الإمكانية يخليه. دي وقائع حقيقية يا جماعة. ولم
People,
أقض
I
حق
have not
العلم إن
fulfilled the right
كنت
of knowledge
كلما
if every
بدا
time greed
طمع
appears I make it a ladder for
صيرته سلما.
myself. I toil for it, planting it.
فأشقى به
Meaning, I
رأسا
prefer to study and toil and
وأكثر
memorize, toil for it,
ضعفا
planting it, and reaping
أشقى
its
به فرجا.
humiliation, and in the end I remain a
وفي الآخر
bad
أطلع
scholar. If
منصوبا.
following ignorance were
إذا
wiser, then it would be
فالإله إن
wiser,
كان
is not the
ألزمك.
ignorant
مش الجاهل خير من عالم السوء. ولذلك
better than the
الكبير
bad
يقول: إذا
scholar?
ما
That is
لم
why
يفدك العلم
Al-Albiri says,
خيرا
if knowledge does
فخير
not benefit
منه
you,
أن
then it
ينقل
is better that you remain ignorant, and if your understanding satisfies you in its pitfalls, then it is not a matter of I wish you had not understood.
تمام.
Therefore, we understand here from God Almighty ordained jihad before he ordained zakat and fasting and before he prohibited usury and alcohol. From this, we understand that the importance of jihad specifically in building the
إنه أهمية الجهاد بالذات في بناء الدولة سابقة عن فرض هذه الشرائع. هذا أمر
state
لا
precedes the
يستعين
imposition of these laws. This is something we shouldn't overlook or forget.
كذلك السنة
Likewise, the
الثانية
second year
للهجرة
of the
هذه
Hera
كانت
we're
متعلقة
currently discussing,
السنة
why it
الثانية
was so
للهجرة بأمور
eventful.
كثيرة.
We've mentioned a few things so far.
ذكرنا حتى الآن كم حاجة؟ امم إيه هما؟
Okay, the
تمام، أدي أول
first one is
واحدة
good,
كويس.
second.
اتنين
This is
دي
number
تمام.
one, all the laws were established and actions were taken and omissions were permitted. Okay, number three we just mentioned is that jihad preceded the rest of these laws. Okay, so my friends, if we look at the Prophet's biography, we'll find that the second year of the Hijrah had the
إذا نظرنا في السيرة النبوية إنه السنة الثانية للهجرة هذه كانت أكثر السنوات في عدد الغزوات.
highest number of battles. How many battles did it have? Does anyone know? 8. God granted him victory. The second year of the Hijrah had 8 battles and this number wasn't achieved in any other year.
8 غزوات. وهذا الرقم لم يتحقق في أي سنة أخرى. فاكرين لما تكلمنا عن الجهاد قلنا خلينا نحفظ مع بعض.
Remember, when we talked about jihad, we said let's memorize this number together, 8424241. This is the number of battles in each year, 8424241. Okay, from the second year until the 9th year.
4 3 1. تمام، من السنة الثانية حتى السنة التاسعة. هذه عدد الغزوات في كل سنة، فلذلك كل سنة 4
This is
غزوات.
the number of battles in each year, so each year there were 4 battles, 3 battles, 2 battles, and 1 battle, but the only year that had 8 battles was the second year. The second year was a very intense year in terms of battles.
في الغزوات. طيب، آخر ملاحظة معنا يا جماعة الخير، وهو أمر ينبغي أن ننتبه إليه وأن نركز فيه جيدا. صلوا على النبي. شوفوا لو ما طلعتوش من الدرس ده إلا
Now one last point, my friends, and this is something we should pay attention to and focus on carefully. Pray for the Prophet. Look, if you don't take away anything from this lesson except the 2 points I'm about to say, then the benefit of Islam is that its religious practices are influential in the political, economic, and social realities of life. Okay, so Muslims go to pray the 5 daily prayers. Each one of them goes down to the mosque to pray, seeking thereby God the hereafter and reward, right? But this prayer has effects, politically, socially, and economically.
هذه الصلاة لها آثار سياسية واجتماعية واقتصادية. لأن هذه الصلاة تؤدي إلى التماسك بين الناس.
This prayer leads to cohesion among people, to mutual acquaintance, and to people getting to know one another. It encourages them to enjoin one another to truth and patience, which may then lead to relationships that develop into economic partnerships. A cohesive and interdependent society is naturally more difficult for authority to dominate or for occupation to control. Authority becomes tyrannical the more fragmented and individualistic a society is. Occupation is more difficult to control the more fragmented and individualistic a society is, the more cohesive and united the society, the more difficult it becomes. Islam, my friends, is the greatest religion in terms of social cohesion because you have
لأن أنت عندك صلوات 5 كل يوم، عندك صيام، عندك زكاة، عندك
5 daily prayers, fasting, zakat, almsgiving, and holidays like Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. All these things revolve around people serving one another. One spends from their wealth, another feeds the hungry, and another meets with one another. Spread peace among yourselves. Islam is a religion deeply ingrained in people's lives, and therefore
ولذلك حقيقة عبر
Throughout history,
تاريخ
Islamic
الأمم
societies
المتحدة
have not
لم نقبل
experienced
فيها
the
أنواع
severe forms of
السيادات
tyranny that have
الشديدة
occurred in
التي
other
وصفت فيها الدول
societies.
الأخرى.
For example, Islamic societies
يعني ما
didn't
حصلش دولة
experience
في
the kind of
المجتمع
massive
الإسلامي إلا
class
كان فيها
divisions
سلبيات
seen in
كاملة
India or the
هي
kind of
التي كانت
extreme
هناك،
despotism that
أو
existed.
استبداد شديد كالذي كان في الصين، أو مسألة العبودية والإقطاع كالذي
In
كان في
China, or the
أوروبا في
issues of
العصور
slavery
الوسطى.
and feudalism that plagued
وأنا الآن أتكلم
medieval
عن الأمور
Europe. I'm
الواضحة.
speaking about obvious
لكن
matters now,
الدولة
but
الحديثة
even the
التي
modern
الآن
state, which
ديمقراطية،
appears
هي
democratic, is in
حقيقة
reality a form of
مسلحة في
despotism,
الغرب.
even in the West.
ما
Western
تزال
researchers who
الباحثون
discuss the
الغربيون
concept of the
اللي
state
بيتكلموا عن
still
فكرة الدولة ما يزالون يقولون بأنه الدولة ما
say
تزال
that the state
هشة في
remains
العالم
fragile
العربي
in the
والإسلامي،
Arab and Islamic world.
ما
The
تزال
remaining
قضية
social
التماسك
cohesion prevents the
الاجتماعي
state from becoming a
يمنع
monstrous,
الدولة من
despotic
أن
entity
تكون
in the Western and old
مستمدة
European
على
style.
النمط
Someone might
الغربي والنمط
ask,
الأوروبي.
how is it that we see the
واحد يقول لي بعد
Western
كده
world has
احنا شايفين
democracy
العالم الغربي عنده
demonstrations?
ديمقراطية وعنده مظاهرات وعنده صحافة حرة وعنده تداول سلطة، بينما عالمنا
Free
الإسلامي
press and a
ضايع
peaceful
بينهب الحرية.
transfer of power, while our
هذا
Islamic
وهم
world is lost as we see.
هو
This, my
حقيقي
friends, is the
وموجود.
reason I say that the
الدولة
state in the
الغربية
West can
تستطيع أن
stabilize and
تزخرف
improve
وزخرف
itself because it has
نفسها
complete control
وهي
over its
بالفعل
people.
متمكنة تمكنا تاما من الناس، بينما الدول في عالمنا العربي غير متمكنة هذا
While
التمكن
states in our
التام.
Arab world don't
فلذلك
have this
جعل
complete
النظام
control,
وحشي
therefore they
قاسيا،
resort to the brutal, crude, and
لأنها لا
blatant
تستطيع أن
appearance,
تخادع
because
الناس
it cannot
وغير
deceive people, it
متملكة
does not
بهم
possess them as
كما
Western
تتملك
countries
الدول
possess
الغربية
the system over the
السيستم
people. Of course, this is what their
للناس.
elites say, and
طبعا هذا الكلام يقوله نخبتهم ويعرفه نخبتهم إن الدولة الحديثة هذه إله جديد
their elite know that
يتمثل
this
في وجود
modern
الله
state is
يسيطر
a
على
new
كل شيء.
God enjoying divine powers
ربما
controlling
بدأ
everything.
بعض
Perhaps some of their
المنظورين
public have begun to
نشرا
feel this
بهذا
pressure with the
الخبر
Al Aqsa
خوفا
flood and all their attempts
وإن
to
كل
protest, and
من
all their
حاول
governors'
تغيير
attempts at
الحجاب وكل
demonstrations do
محاولاتهم
not
للمظاهرات لا تغير من الواقع شيئا، تظل الدولة متمكنة برضه
change anything in
وقادرة على إتاح
reality. The
لعموم
state
الناس
remains firmly in
الحرية.
control, and the most that is
لكن
available to the
الذي لا
general
يؤثر
public is
شيئا،
barking, words that
لأن
have
الدول
no
في عالمنا
effect.
العربي دول
Meanwhile, the
منحصرة على
states in
نفسها
our
فعلا
Arab world are
لأنها
truly
غير
afraid for
متمتعة
themselves because they do
بالاستقرار
not
والنمو.
enjoy stability and dominance. So now
فالآن
what I
الذي
want
أريد
to
أن
say
أقوله
here is
هنا
that Islam has
أنه
a
الإسلام له
miraculous structure in
تركيبة
shaping Islamic
وحافظ في
society. This
صياغة
structure
مجتمع
makes
الإسلام.
society cohesive and united through
حقيقة
an
تجعل
automatic
المجتمع
interaction that the
يتماسك
Muslim does without being aware of
ويتكاتف
its
بتفاعل تلقائي يفعله المسلم وهو غير منتبه لآثاره الاجتماعية والسياسية والاقتصادية. المسلم يفعله
social,
وهو له
political,
دنيا
and
والدار
economic
الآخرة.
effects. The Muslim does it
فالمسلم
while
واحد
hoping
في
for
التماسك
God and the
والمحاباة
hereafter, meaning
والأرحام.
kinship ties, cohesion between families.
المسلم
The
يفعله
Muslim
وهو
does it while
يرجو الله
hoping for
والدار
God and the
الآخرة، لكن
hereafter,
النتيجة
but the
تظهر
automatic
النتيجة
result
في
that
المجتمع.
occurs in
نتيجة
society
هذا
is more of the
المجتمع
unity and cohesion that drives
الذي
people to
يوقف
establish
الأوقاف،
endowments to
الذي يذهب لتعليم ولده القرآن الكريم، الذي يذهب
teach their
لسماع
children the
الدرس بعد
Holy
خطبة
Quran, to
الجمعة،
attend
الذي
lessons
يطعم
and Friday
الطعام في
sermons,
رمضان
to
في
feed the
بيته
hungry during
وأحيانا أو
Ramadan and at other
صيامه في
times to
نفسه.
give charity to.
كل
Spend all
هذا
this is
يفعله
done by a
المسلم وهو
Muslim,
يرجو
hoping
الله
for
والدار
God and the
الآخرة.
hereafter. This creates a
لكن
spontaneous
نتيجة
interaction within the
التفاعل
community,
التلقائي
making
في
it
المجتمع
cohesive.
يجعله
This can be
متماسكا.
summarized in the phrase Islam.
وهذا هو الذي يمكن اختصاره في كلمة الإسلام هو الحل. لأن
Is
أنت
the
لا يمكن
solution?
تصل
You cannot
لمجتمع
achieve such a
بهذا
cohesive
التماسك
and unified
والتكامل
society unless its members
لولا
do
أن
these things
أفراده
hoping for God
يفعلون
and the
هذا وهم
hereafter.
يرجون
You
الله
know, if you
والدار
perform
الآخرة.
these actions with the sole aim of
أنا عارف لو
achieving
أنت بتعمل
social
الأعمال دي
cohesion, you'll
وفي
find yourself
دماغك
becoming lazy
وفي
after a
دماغ
while, or
المجتمع
if the
في أنك
community
تفشل
isn't as
بعد كده،
cohesive.
أو المجتمع لو لم يتماسك كما تحب تفتر تيأس. لكن
As you like, you'll
المحرك
be
الدافع
vulnerable, but the
المستمر
driving force
هو
behind this
ثقة
continuous
الله
motivation
والدين.
is your hope in God and the
هذا يجعل
hereafter.
العمل
This keeps the
مستمرا،
work going,
الصلوات
prayers
مستمرة، حضور
continue,
الخطبة مستمر،
sermon attendance
الزكاة
continues,
مستمرة،
zakat
الصدقة
continues,
مستمرة،
charity
الصيام
continues,
مستمر.
fasting continues. Therefore, the
ولذلك
community is
ينجح
renewed.
المجتمع. واضح يا جماعة؟
Clear,
لذلك
everyone? That's
المسألة
why success in
السعادة
Islam in
في
this life is
الدنيا
the
هي
same
أصل
as
الفلاح في
success in the
الآخرة.
hereafter. Abandoning Islam is a loss in the hereafter and a loss
خسارة
in
في
this
الآخرة
life, while
وخسارة
adhering to
في
Islam is success in the
الدنيا. والتمسك بالإسلام فلاح في الآخرة وفلاح في الدنيا. هذا هو
hereafter
السر
and
الذي
success in
لا
this life.
يمكن أن
This is the
ينافذ في
secret that
أي
cannot be
نظام
found elsewhere. In what other
ما
man-made
فيش
system can
نظام
abolish
عربي
this kind of dynamism and activity in people accept Islam? This is because Islam connects people to the afterlife too.
لأنه يربط الناس بما بعد الموت بالإيمان بالله بالدار الآخرة برجاء الجنة بالفرار
Faith in
من النار.
God to the hereafter, to the hope of paradise, and to the fear of hell. This is what subsequently fosters compassion, mutual support, spreading peace, and other manifestations of social interaction. Therefore, the Islamic political, economic, and social system is truly a miraculous system, a
نظام رباني معجز.
divinely ordained and miraculous system. That's why penetrating it is difficult and controlling it is difficult. The Muslim community continues to resist the conspiracies, trials, and tribulations that befell Islam. Had they befallen any other nation, it would have dissolved and ended up dissolving into Western civilization. But
طيب هذا الكلام مجرد توقع نظري؟ لا أبدا. روح
this is
الصين.
merely theoretical speculation. Not at all. Look at China. China has always been a civilization with a distinct ideology and direction opposed to the West. Yet, if you go to China now, you will find its buildings, streets, economic system, way of interacting, and relationships all Western in nature. Japan, after its defeat in
اليابان بعدما هزمت في الحرب العالمية الثانية، اليابان الآن تعتبر جزءا من الغرب.
World War II is now considered part of the West. Those who now speak of a civilizational alternative to Western civilization find no resistance or alternative, except in Islam, even communism, which represented some. Its faces are the antithesis of the Western system. The first thing that happened after the collapse of communism was that Russia
والناس اللي فيها ملابسهم عاداتهم
and its
تقاليدهم
people, their clothes, customs, traditions, and the shape of their economy are a copy of the Western world. The society or country that still resists, still carries the seeds of independence, and still is strongly connected to its roots is the Islamic country. It's clear, my friends, the connection between this world and the hereafter in what we're talking about. So, these are the points I wanted us to focus on in our discussion about the second year of the Hijra. Let's review them quickly. First, we said that this
السنة الثانية للهجرة. نستعرضها سريعا. قلنا أول حاجة إنه هذه السنة
year proves the significant difference between the period before and after the establishment of the Islamic State. Second, most of the laws revealed in this year are laws of action, not laws of abstention. Jihad was made obligatory before the other laws which most contemporaries now understand as more important and
الآن على أنها أهم من الجهاد وأسبق من الجهاد. الزكاة والصيام والحجاب والربا
prior to jihad, zakat, fasting, hijab, usury, and so on, and alcohol. Furthermore, these acts of worship have social and economic effects on building the Muslim community, and this is only true of Islam. Let's pray for the Prophet and move on to the
ندخل إلى السنة الكام؟ السنة الثالثة للهجرة.
third year of the Hijra. We will divide it into two parts: the period before the Battle of Uhud and the period after the Battle of Uhud. The Battle of Uhud took place in the year in the month of
ما بعد غزوة أحد. تمام؟ غزوة أحد وقعت في شهر كام في السنة الثالثة؟ مين يعرف؟ في شهر
Shawwal of the third year. Who knows, in the month of Shawwal of the third year. So how many months are there before the Battle of Uhud? 13. How is that possible? The whole year is 12. Yes, no, I am now from the beginning of the third year.
نعم؟ لا أنا دلوقتي من أول السنة الثالثة إلى شوال. طبعا كثيرون لا يحفظون الشهور العربية.
Until Shawwal, of course many do not know the Arabic months. Shawwal is the 10th month. Okay, so we have 10 months. Why do we stop at the Battle of Uhud and say that the Battle of Uhud is a pivotal moment? Because we mentioned before that history in general, according to
إنه التاريخ بشكل عام، التاريخ عند الجماعة المؤرخين نوعين كبار. تاريخ سياسي وتاريخ حضاري.
historians is of two main types: political history and cultural history. Political history is the history of the palaces of government, the history of conflicts, the history of wars, the history of conspiracies, whatever they may be. Therefore, it is the least significant period in the history of any nation.
تاريخ أي أمة. تمام؟ بينما التاريخ الحضاري ده تاريخ الفنون.
Cultural history, on the other hand, is the history of arts, inventions, sciences, poetry, literature, and architecture. That is cultural history. Therefore, it is
كيف
always
أن التاريخ
cultural
الإسلامي
history.
تاريخ ناظر
History
وجميل.
is rich and glorious, but
تمام.
we mentioned which is more
لكن
important,
ذكرنا
political history
أهمية
or cultural history.
أيهما أهم، التاريخ السياسي ولا التاريخ الحضاري؟ التاريخ السياسي، لأنه هو الذي يقود التاريخ
Political
الحضاري.
history is what drives civilizational
لما
history. When a
الدولة
state is
تقوم
established and
وتستقر هي
stabilized,
بيحصل
a
فيها حضارة.
civilization begins to
لو الدولة مش
emerge.
عارفة
If a
تقوم ولا
state
تستقر
cannot be
مفيش حضارة.
established or stabilized, there is no
الحضارة هي نتيجة
civilization.
الاستقرار.
Civilization is the daughter of
تمام.
stability. That's why
وعلشان
the most
كده
important
التاريخ
history
الأهم هو
is
التاريخ
political
السياسي.
history, and the most
وأهم ما
important
في
thing in
التاريخ
history is
السياسي الحروب. الحروب
political
هي التي
history.
تشكل
Wars.
التاريخ.
Wars are what shape history.
موقف
The
الحروب
famous
العالمية
Chinese
الثانية
leader
مثلا
Si
إذا قرأنا
Tong
عنه
said that
نصوص
history
كثيرة،
moves from the barrel of a
هذه
gun.
كانت
Wars
الحروب
are what shape
يسمونها
history, and that's
سيمبولية.
why every state has a war of
الحروب
independence,
هي
a war
التي
of
تكتب
establishment,
التاريخ،
a
وعشان
war
كده
of
كل دولة
collapse, and a war of
لها حرب
annihilation.
استقلال، حرب تأسيس، ولها حرب انهيار وحرب زوال. تمام. فالآن
So now, the Battle of Uhud is an important
المعركة
battle that
الأخيرة
will
معركة
have
مهمة
important effects. That's why
ستكون
we will
لها
take
آثار
the
مهمة
third year
جدا.
and stop at
وعشان
what,
كده
when the
نمسك
Battle of
السنة
Uhud took
الثالثة
place. We
اللي
will
وقفنا
also
عند إيه؟
divide these
عند
months into
معركة
3
أحد. طيب
files.
ال10
The
شهور دول سنقسمهم أيضا إلى 3 ملفات. الملف الأول هو
first
ملف
file is the
الحروب.
file of wars and invasions, because we
عشان
always
دايما
said,
الحروب
what are
والمعارك
wars and
هي
invasions? It
من
is the
أهم
most
الشيء
important
في
thing
تاريخ
in
الأمم.
the history of
ليس
nations,
على سبب
and
من
therefore, by
عبقريات
the way, it is one
حسابنا
of the
أنهم
geniuses of
سردوا
our
سيرة
ancestors that
النبي
they
صلى
called
الله
the
عليه وسلم
Biography of the Prophet. May God
بالمغازي.
bless him and grant him peace. Al.
طبعا هذه التسمية لا يحبها بعض المعاصرين، بس أصل بعض المعاصرين دول عايشين في زمن الهزيمة، لا يفهمون هذا الكلام. يقول لك احنا خلينا حياة النبي حروب،
Maghazi,
حياة
the
النبي
expeditions.
غزوات،
Of
وكأن
course,
حياة
some
النبي ماشية في
contemporaries do
مرحلة
not like
ما
this
ملهاش
name, but the
دعوة.
origin of some of these
شوفوا كلام
contemporaries
العاصرين
is that they
الناس.
live in a time of defeat
أنا
and do
أقول
not
وأكرر
understand this
وأكرر
talk.
وأكرره.
They say to you, we made the
الشيء
wars of the
الذي
Prophet's
قرأه
life
الناس
Ghazawat
من
raids as if the
المعاصرين
life of the
ولم يذهب
Prophet
إلى
had no
العلماء
civilization, no
شيء
development.
باطل.
Look, people pray for
مبدئيا
me. I
يعني مبدئيا
think I
تجد
said that and I repeat it. Anything
كثير
that
من
you
ترك
see that has
العلماء
emerged among
أو صحيح
contemporaries and was not
يفتح الله له
mentioned by the
الآن
ancients, you
ثم
doubt from
يفتح
the
ولا يفتح
outset.
على
I
المتأخرين.
mean, you
هذه
doubt
هي
from the outset. It is true that the first
لكن
left
ترى
for the
شيئا
last, and it is
يذكره
true that God
المعاصرون ولم
opens up
يمارس
for the
به
later what he
غيرهم
did,
على
not
الجميع.
open up for the earlier. This is in the
للأسف.
details.
لماذا؟
But you see
لأنه
something that
المتأخرين
contemporaries
دول
mention and the
كتبوا
earlier
أسفار
ones did not pay
محرمة
attention to in general.
للمسلمين.
You doubt it. Why? Because
هم
the
كانوش
early
مكسوفين
scholars
من
who wrote
حاجة.
about
ما
Islam were
كانش على
perhaps
راسهم
not
بطحة
defeated, so they weren't
بتنزل
ashamed of
المسلمين.
anything. They didn't
كانوش
have a bump
خايفين
in
من
their
طريقهم
heads, as
يقودوا
the Egyptians say. They
الصراعات
weren't
ومش عايزين
afraid. They weren't
ننازع عن
engaged in
إمكانياتنا.
conflicts and didn't want to be
هم كتبوا
criticized.
الإسلام
Those who wrote about
وهم
Islam wrote it
سيدنا
during a
النبي.
time of empowerment. For
فمنهم
example, their
زودوا
naming of the
مثلا
Prophet's
تسمية
biography as
سيرة
Al-Maghazi, the
النبي
campaigns, is
بالمغازي.
a
ده قراءة طبيعية جدا، لأنه المغازي يعني الحروب
very natural interpretation,
هي
because
العنصر
Al-Maghazi
الأهم
means
في
wars,
تشكيل
which are the most
الحكم.
important element in the formation of any state. Therefore, the
فلذلك
history of
يمكن
any
الذهاب
nation can
خلال
indeed be
التاريخ
summarized
ولتقف
in
في
its
حروبها
wars.
حقا.
Truly, if you want to summarize the
يعني لو أنت
history
عايز
of
تختصر
any nation,
تاريخ
its
يقول
wars
لك
are an excellent summary.
حروبها
Then the modern
اختصرها
person comes
كذا.
along and tells you that those ancient people
يجي بقى
were
المعاصر يقول لك الناس القدماء دول أخطأوا لما قالوا مغازي، وكأن حياة النبي كلها
wrong when they
حروب.
called it
ده واحد
Al-Maghazi and that
مكسوف من
the
الحروب،
Prophet's whole life was
مع انه
wars. This
هو
person is
ضحى
ashamed of
بكثير
wars,
من
even though he
مسيرته.
was the one killed, slaughtered, and whose
مع الأسف
blood was shed.
هذه طبيعة
Unfortunately,
المهزومين.
this is the nature of the
يرى
defeated.
المعاناة من
Cowards see
العجز
weakness
عقلا.
as wisdom, and that is
تلك
the deception of a vile
طبيعتهم
nature.
اللئيم
So,
حقا يعني. طيب فالآن
we
قلنا
said that the
10
months of the
شهور
third
دول
year
السنة
have
الثالثة
3
سميناهم
files. The
3 ملفات.
first file
الملف
is the
الأول هو
file of
ملف
wars and
الحروب.
raids. The second
الملف
file is what
الثاني
we will
هو
call
ملف هذه
operations.
العمليات
The
الخاصة.
special operations are a bit less
أعطتهم
frequent than the
exposure
wars, but
لكن
they
إيه
belong to the
تنتهي
security and
بانتهاء
military
الأمور
field.
العسكرية.
The third file is the
والملف
file of
الثالث هو ملف الأحداث الاجتماعية، يعني ما كان من أخبار الزواج، ما كان من
social
أخبار
events,
الولادة.
meaning news of
ونتوقف
marriages
عندها
and
إن شاء الله.
births.
يبقى
We'll
عندنا كام
stop
ملف
there, God
دلوقتي؟
willing. So how
ثلاثة
many
إيه هم؟
files do we have? 3 now. What are the wars and what is it called? We called it
والإيه؟ أيوة اسمها إيه؟ سميناها إيه؟ العمليات الخاصة
special operations and social matters.
تمام.
Okay, in these
طيب
months we
في
have 3 wars, we
هذه
have
الأشياء
2
كلها
raids and a secret mission, or we
عندنا
have 1 raid, 2 raids, and a
3
secret
حروب.
mission. If we're speaking in
عندنا
Arabic and
غزوتين
focusing on grammar
وسرية،
of
أو عندنا غزوتان وسرية لو إحنا بقى بنتكلم باللغة العربية ومركزين مع النحو. طبعا احنا ايه دخلت العجمة إلى ألسنتنا مع الأسف الشديد.
Course, we've unfortunately had some foreign influences creeping into our speech. So we have two raids and a secret mission. What's the difference between a raid and a secret mission? May God bless you. We said that the scholars of the Maghazi military expeditions or the scholars of the Seerah biography of the Prophet differentiated between a raid and a secret mission. A raid is one in which the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, personally participated, and a secret mission is one in which the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, sent out, without participating himself. Okay, so now yes, we'll come back and talk about it. Now we have two raids. The first raid is the raid of Dhi, the matter of the expedition. What is this? This is a good expedition. This is the first one. Let's review the expeditions after Badr so that we can draw a continuous line. We said that after the Battle of Badr there was an expedition, an important but unknown expedition which took place 1 week 7 nights after Badr. It was the expedition of Banu Sulaym. Some scholars call it the expedition of Karkar al-Qadar. Karkar al-Qadar is the name of a place. Karkar means smooth land and al. Qadar is a type of bird whose color is a shade of gray, meaning its color is not pure, so they called these birds Qadara. The place where these birds land is this place which has water, so they called it Karkar al-Qadar, meaning the land where these birds with a shade of gray color gather. That is its name. We said that it was 7 nights after Badr, meaning it was the 24th, 25th, or 26th of Ramadan in the year Hira, year missing. We mentioned after that in Shawwal, the middle of Shawwal, the expedition of Banu Kainuka. This was the first expedition against the Jews, and we mentioned after that the expedition of al-Suwaik. This was when Abu Sufyan attacked Medina in a swift raid. We said he killed 2 people, burned palm trees and a house, and the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, pursued him. The polytheists then began throwing out barley porridge, which is food, to lighten their load, so it was called the Battle of the Market or the Battle of Barley Porridge. So that's the list of battles. We said the Battle of Barley Porridge took place in the early days of Dhul Hijjah, around the 5th, because the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, returned from it and entered the Eid al-Adha period. Okay, the Battle of Badr is similar to the Battle of Banu Sulaym. How is it similar? If you remember, we said the Battle of Banu Sulaym. Banu Sulaym was a tribe located east or southeast of Medina. This tribe benefited from the passage of Quraysh's trade to Syria, so the defeat of Quraysh at Badr impacted their economic situation. They gathered to attack Medina. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, learned of them and surprised them in their homes. They fled from him and he seized what he could, the camels, and we mentioned that the spoils at that time were 500 camels. The raid of Dhi Amr was the same story, but the sons of a people from Gadafan, the sons of Thalaba and Muharib, both of whom are clans from the tribe of Gadafan, and they were almost in the same place, meaning close to these locations, and for the same reason the news reached them that the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, had gathered these people to attack Medina. So the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, went out to them, leaving our master Uthman bin Affan in charge of Medina. He had with him in the army 450 Muslims, and he raided them in their homes. When they were surprised by the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, they scattered into the mountains. As we mentioned, this was the custom of the Arabs. When they were surprised by something they could not handle, they would scatter to where? In the mountains, especially since their houses are not things that can be lost. This is the expedition called the expedition of Dhi Amr al-Makan, and it is called the expedition of Gadafat. In this expedition, when the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, stayed in their lands for a month, which is a month of travel. Of course, the Prophet's stay and the length of his stay in this place is a kind of consolidation of this victory and consolidation of these spirits and influence, and so that these people would not attack again. But the famous incident that we all know happened in it, which is that their leader Dathir bin al-Harith, when the Muslims arrived in this region, they were hit by heavy rain. At one point they
شديد. ففي لحظة من اللحظات
rested
استراحوا
and took off their
وتحفظوا
clothes and hung
جلودهم
them on the
وعلقوها
trees to
على
dry.
الأشجار
At that
لكي
time may
تحتفظ.
God have mercy
ففي
on you
ذلك
at that
الوقت
time Dather bin Al.
ففي ذلك
Harith saw an
الوقت
opportunity
سكت
for the Muslims, so he
الرسول
crept towards the
جملة
Prophet, may
من
God bless him
المسلمين
and grant him peace, and took hold of his
النبي
sword
صلى
and
الله
said,
عليه
"O
وسلم
Muhammad,
وأمسك بسيفه وقال يا محمد من يمنعك مني الآن
who will
فقال
protect
رسول
you from me
الله
now?" The
الله
messenger of God said, "God." And
فتقول
the narration
سيرة
says, Gabriel
وضربه
struck him in the
بحديدة
chest
في
and he fell
صدره
to the ground and the
فسقط
sword fell from
أرضا
his hand.
وسقط
The
من يده
Prophet, may
السيف
God bless him and grant him peace,
فأمسك
seized
به
him and
النبي
said,
صلى
"And who
الله عليه
will
وسلم
protect
وقال
you
ومن
from me now?"
الذين معه
Dather said, "No
جنبه
one, here there are two."
فقال دعثور لا أحد. وهنا روايتان إما أنه أسلم وقال أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله
Narrations, either he embraced
وذكر
Islam and said, "I
أنه
bear
رأى
witness
رجلا
that there is no
طويلا
God but God," and
عريضا
he mentioned that he
دفع
saw
به
a
صدره
tall, broad
وعرف
man who
أن
pushed him in
الرجل
the chest, so he
يرتد
knew
عنه
that the
وحي
man
من الله.
meant our master Muhammad,
وإما أنه
supported by
أسلم
God. So either he embraced
وإما أنه
Islam or
قال
he said, "By
والله
God,
لن
I will never
أخلفه عليه
increase your
السلام عن أبدا. فكانت هذه من معجزات نبينا صلى الله عليه
gatherings
وسلم
again." So this was one of the
ومن
miracles of our
دلائله
Prophet, may God bless him and grant him
التوكل.
peace, and
طيب
one of the proofs of his
ثم
prophethood complete. Okay. Then the
عاد
Prophet, may
النبي صلى
God
الله
bless
عليه
him and
وسلم
grant him
إلى
peace,
ذلك
returned
المدينة.
to Medina.
وحين
Of course, when you look
خرج
at the map, you will find
فكان
that this side is the eastern
هذا
side,
الجانب هو
meaning
الجانب الشرقي يعني غطفان هؤلاء إلى شرق المدينة بنو سليم إلى شرق المدينة.
Gadafan. These are to the east of
طيب
Medina, Banu
هذه
Sulaim
الطوائف
to the
التي
east of
كانت
Medina.
تهاجم
Okay,
المدينة
these are the tribes that were
ماتت في
attacking Medina.
رواية
What is the explanation for
وسر
that? The
ذلك
explanation for
كما
this,
قلت
as we
لكم
mentioned, is
بأنهم
that there were
رضوا
alliances between them
بالإفلاس
and the Quraysh, and
وأنهم
they
يستفيدون من
benefited
ظهور
from the
تجارة
passage of
قريش إلى
Quraysh
المدينة.
trade to Medina,
فبالتالي
therefore the
كان
establishment of
بهذه
the
الوسيلة
Islamic State.
وتهديد تجارة قريش وتهديد لهم. طيب لماذا لم
And the
يكن
threat
هذا
to
في
Quraysh trade
ناحية
was a
غرب
threat to them.
المدينة؟
Now, why wasn't this happening? In the
يذكر بعض
western part of
العلماء
Medina,
كالشيخ أبو
some
بكر
scholars,
الرازي
including Sheikh Abu
أن
Shaba, may God have
بني
mercy on him,
سليم
mention that the
حالف
Prophet, peace
قبائل
and
غرب
blessings be upon
المدينة
him,
كانت
allied himself with the
لاتجاه
tribes west of
المدينة وبين
Medina.
البحر الأحمر
These
قبائل غرب
tribes,
المدينة.
located between Medina
وهذا
and the Red
الكلام
Sea, were the
مذكور.
ones the Prophet allied
طبعا صحيح ذكر
himself
قبل
with. Of
ذلك أن
course, it
جهينة
was
كجهينة
mentioned previously that
التي
the
حلف
Prophet allied
به
himself with
سفينة
Juhayna and
تمنع عن
Banu
الغزوة
Damra.
إلى
Remember when we
قريش
talked about
كما
the
كان
early
هذا في
battles
معركة
before
اليمين.
Badr and the alliances
ولذلك
the
كان
Prophet
هذا
made?
الطريق
Therefore,
طريقا
this route
غير
was
مسلوك.
not well trodden. It
ويمكن
can
أن
also be
يقال
said
أيضا
that
بأن هناك قبائل أخرى حلفها النبي لأنه إحنا لا نجد
there
في
were other
هؤلاء
tribes with
القبائل
whom the
معركة.
Prophet allied himself,
ويقال
because we don't
بأن
find
هذه
any
القبائل
attempts to
حين
cross
دخلت
through this
في
area.
حلف النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم صار الطريق
Or it could be
ممكنا
said that
للبقية
when
من
these
جهته.
tribes entered into the Prophet's
وقد يقال
alliance, the
أن
route
ربما
became unsafe for
هذه
Quraysh
المنطقة
from their
غرب المدينة
direction.
هي منطقة
Or it could
وعرة
be said that perhaps this area
ولكن
west of
للطريق
Medina
المسلوك
was
إلى
rugged and
قريش
therefore not a well-trodden route for
المسلوك
caravans.
الطريق
The issue is on the
الشرقي.
eastern route,
تمام.
so
يبقى هذه الغزوة الأولى غزوة ذي أمر وكانت في
this first expedition
المحرم
was
من
the
سنة
expedition of
3
Dhi
هجرية.
Amr, which
طيب
took
الغزوة
place
الثانية
in Muharram of the third year
هذه
of the
غزوة
Hijra.
تسمى
Now the second expedition
بحران
is called the
بويهران
expedition of Buran or
يعني
Buran. Both
كلا
spellings are
الدارين
found in the
فيه
books of
تفسير.
biography.
وهذه
This
كانت
one
في
took place in
جمادى
Jumada Alula.
جمادى
Jumada
الثاني كم
Alula means
شهر
a
من الغزوة الأولى؟
few
محرم
months after
صفر
the first
ربيع أول
expedition.
ربيع ثاني
Muharram, Safar, Rabbi Al-Awwal, Rabbi Al-Thani, Jumada Alula,
هذه
meaning 4 months later.
تأسب
This
فيها
one
أيضا
also
بنو
involved the
سليم بن
Banu
عبد الله.
Sulaim ibn Mansur, and the same events that occurred in the previous
ووقع
2
فيها نفس
expeditions
ما
happened.
وقع في الغزوتين الماضيتين. تمام. خرج إليهم النبي صلى الله عليه
The
وسلم
Prophet, peace and blessings be
ب300
upon him, went out
على
to them,
مدينة
with
سيرة
300 men, leaving Abdullah
ومعه
ibn Maktum in charge of Medina. Buran
بحران
is
هذا أيضا
also
هو
the place where
المكان
the Prophet,
الذي
peace and blessings be
يعني
upon him,
نرى
reached his
أن اتجاه
destination.
إليه
This
خروج النبي
is
صلى الله عليه وسلم
southeast of
وهذا
Medina.
إلى
He
الآن إلى
also
الجانب
stayed there for
الشرقي من
10
المدينة.
nights, peace and blessings be upon him.
تمام.
So,
وأيضا بقي فيها 10 ليالي صلى الله عليه وسلم. يبقى الغزوتين يجمع بينهما وبين غزوة بني سليم السابقة
what
المشهد
these
الذي
2
يجمع بينهما.
expeditions have in common with the previous expedition against the Banu Sulaim is the initiative, the
سرعة
speed
وصول
with which
نبوة النبي
information
صلى الله عليه
reached the
وسلم
Prophet, peace and blessings be
وكذلك
upon
سرعة
him, and the
تجهز
speed with which
المسلم
the Muslim army
للعودة
prepared and took the initiative to
يذهب
go
بها
to their
النبي إلى
lands, they are
ديارهم في
surprised
الليالي
to
الأولى
find
فيها بأن الجيش الذي ينوونهم الهجوم
that the
عليهم
army they
صاعدا
intended to
سيتفرق.
attack is already within their grasp and
طبعا
it
هذا تطور
disperses.
كبير
This is a
في
significant
تاريخ
development in what we
سلسلة
might call
المخابرات
the
الإسلامية.
Islamic intelligence
معلومات
apparatus, where
بسرعة
information is
تمام.
received
تطور كبير
quickly
في
It is also a major development in the Islamic military apparatus, which prepares with speed, surprise, and initiative. Therefore, as we have mentioned before and we reiterate now, this is one of the miracles of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him in all the worlds, a miracle that no conqueror, military commander, or political leader has achieved, the tremendous political outcome with the fewest casualties, the fewest deaths. This has never happened to anyone other than our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. You transformed the scattered and divided Arabs into a single state within 9 years and they became a global superpower. In the end, when we try to calculate the number of Muslim and polytheist casualties, it does not exceed 1,000 according to the highest accounts. This is a miracle. The secret of this miracle lies entirely in the early arrival of information, accurate information, and the speed with which the army is prepared. Therefore, Islam is very sensitive to anything that might distort information. Lying is forbidden and verification is commanded. O you who have believed, if a disobedient person comes to you with news, investigate lest you harm a people out of ignorance and become over what you have done regretful. There are many verses and hadiths about lying. The truth is, every country that has an efficient intelligence service is capable of achieving victory at the lowest possible cost. Therefore, countries spend on intelligence and security services more than on anything else, on industry, agriculture, and trade. Why? Because a single piece of accurate information can spare a country a war that consumes everything, destroying agriculture, industry, and trade all at once. You see, Israel is now in reality a security state, and what the resistance fighters are doing in Gaza is a military miracle, that there are people who can hold prisoners for 2 years in such an exposed environment is a military miracle. I have no doubt it will be studied in security colleges later on. When you want to hide someone, none of you have ever thought of or experienced hiding someone wanted by the law, even in a weak country. So what about with American, European, and Israeli technology? The open skies, the besieged areas, the destroyed houses. How can you provide aid to these people? How can you feed them, even in the face of famine? How can you preserve the bodies in the absence of electricity? What's happening in Gaza is truly a kind of miracle, but also consider that the major strikes Israel has achieved were based on information. I mean, look how it was able to reach, for example, the issue of the pager device that killed and wounded 3,000 people in one day. The information that came led to the ability to eliminate half of the Iranian military council. In a single moment, Iranian nuclear scientists, Hezbollah leaders, or even Haniyeh when he was assassinated in Iran. Look at how they reached the place where he was staying, even though it was a presidential location. The information, I don't want to say half the victory, perhaps the information was 3/4 of the victory. Here we see a precedent with our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that most of these battles, even most Muslims don't know their names or remember them because no fighting took place in them. I mean, we know the Battle of Badr and we know the Battle of Uhud, we know the major battles in which fighting occurred. Okay, so out of the 27 battles that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, participated in, you will find that 9 are the famous ones. Okay, so where are the rest of the 18 battles? Quick and accurate information led to a quick and accurate move, which led to powerful results. A political strategy without paying a price in fighters, even from these people, even from the enemies, I mean. Most of them converted to Islam. This is from the favor of our prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, upon the people. Okay, so now we have two battles. We said the battle of Dhi Amr and the battle of Baran or Baran, and there is a secret one, and this secret one is called the monkey's secret or the monkeys. Both pronunciations are found in the biography. This secret one was led by our master Zayd ibn Haritha. This has an interesting story. Now, if you are sitting in Mecca and attending the Dar al-Nadwa with the leaders of Quraysh, okay, so who are the remaining leaders of Quraysh now? Abu Sufyan, Safwan ibn Umayyah, the big names. Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, Khalid ibn al-Walid after the death of his father al-Walid ibn al-Mughira and the conversion of his brother al-Walid ibn al-Walid, the people who are sitting in this council now after the Battle of Badr and after these battles. How do they see the situation now? We know that Quraysh relies mainly on trade, on the economy. Right, good people, on what do they rely? Regarding trade and the economy, the emergence of the Islamic State in Medina and these previous experiences, the most important thing it did on the economic side was that it cut off the route to the Levant. Now the Quraysh trade caravans, the winter and summer journeys, the journey to the Levant and the journey to Yemen. Quraysh was a region that you can say was a trade exchange region, a regional trade center. Now one of its ends was cut off, so its economy was harmed or its economic nerve was struck. The place, may God bless the Prophet, the place that has no agriculture and no industry and depends on trade and depends on the exchange of goods. What is the most important thing for it? Road safety, commercial road safety. What happens if a commercial road is threatened? That's it, that economy is over. Okay, now we're sitting with the people from Mecca. What's the date? The historical context now shows that caravans were threatened in Medina, and not only on their way out but also on their return journey. The Battle of Al-Ashra was against the caravan that survived, and the Battle of Badr was against the same caravan when it returned. Now when we gathered Banu Sulaim, Banu Gadafan, Banu Muharib and Thalaba from Gadafan, what happened? Before they were ready to set out, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had already raided their homes. So the emergency situation or the urgent situation was to find a route that would allow us to reach Syria without passing through Medina. They contacted a man experienced in the routes and paths of Najd. Najd is in the east of the Arabian Peninsula. Mecca and Medina are in the Hijaz in the west of the Arabian Peninsula. Najd is in the east of the Arabian Peninsula. They needed a guide. What would this guide do? The caravan would travel from Mecca to the Najd route, then to the Syria route without passing through Medina. And indeed, they found an expert guide named Furat Ibn Hayyan. He told them, I can handle this. This route is not used by anyone from the companions of Muhammad. Meaning the place was all deserts and barren lands. The only problem was that we would need to be prepared so that we wouldn't find a place to stop or water every so often, so we had to be fully prepared. Safwan ibn Umayyah, and in some accounts Abu Sufyan, whether the leader was Safwan or Abu Sufyan, the accounts differ, and some accounts combine them, saying that both Safwan and Abu Sufyan were in the same caravan. Okay, so if Safwan ibn Umayyah told him it's winter so we won't need much water, then the important thing is that we put our trust in God. This news leaked to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, so the Prophet sent a detachment led by Zayd ibn Haritha to attack this caravan on the road to Najd. They attacked them at this place called Al-Qarda or Al-Qarda. Of
وطبعا زي
course, because the
قريش
Quraysh
كانت
were taking risks, they
بتغامر
had
مغامرة،
amassed a lot of money in this caravan
وكانت هذه
totaling
القافلة قافلة كثيرة
100,000 dirhams
لدرجة
including
بدأوا
20,000
يجمعوها 100
silver,
ألف
so it
درهم،
seems from the size of this
منها
caravan.
20,000 من الفضة. يعني يبدو من حجم هذه القافلة، يعني الآن حين أقرأ في السيرة إنه في قافلة
When I
ستذهب
read
إلى
in the
أرض
biography
جديدة
that in a
للمرة الأولى،
caravan was going to a land they were
مع
going to for the
شهيد
first time
سافرهم
with a
للمرة
guide
الأولى
who was
ورأيت
helping them
فيها
for the
هذا
first
القدر من
time and I
المال،
found
أفهم
this amount of
مباشرة
money there,
إنه
I
هذا
immediately
المال
understood that
دليل
this
على
amount of
تخلف
money was
قريش
evidence of the fear of the
فتريد
Quraysh, so they
صفقة
wanted an
القافلة، يعني
urgent
تريد
deal, meaning they
تجارة،
wanted trade.
يعني قافلة تقوم بصفقة قد تملأ نصف السنة أو تملأ
Meaning a
السنة،
caravan to make a deal that might
بحيث
fill half
أنه
the
لا
year or fill
يأمنون
the
أن
year so that they
ينشر
could
هذا
not be
الخبر
sure
فيما
that
بعد، فلا
this news would
يتسرب
leak later
الخبر
so that they
للمسلمين.
would not be able to use it
ولكن
again.
تسرب
But the
الخبر
news
قبل
leaked before
أن
this deal
تتم
itself
هذه
was
الصفقة
completed, so
نفسها.
this raiding party went and attacked this caravan and of course
فذهبت
a
هذه السرية هاجمت هذه القافلة، وطبعا مفاجأة كبيرة، المكان الذي لا يطرقه أصحاب محمد
big
وجنوده
surprise,
إلى
the place that
رؤوسهم،
Muhammad's
فروا
companions never
بالرجال
leave, they found them at their heads.
وأسروا
The men fled and
الدليل
captured
اللي
the
هو
guide
فضة
who was
الحجاج،
Furat bin Hayyan and they
وعادوا
returned with the
بهذه
money
الآلاف الدراهم
100,000
إلى
dirhams
النبي
to the
صلى الله
Prophet,
عليه
may
وسلم
God bless him
وعاينوه.
and grant him peace, and with them the guide.
فبالتالي كانت هذه السرية
So
يعني
this raiding party was a double blow to
بمستويين
the Quraysh.
لقريش.
The first blow was
الضربة
what?
الأولى هي إيه؟
Money is the first blow, it's the immediate need, but the more
المال،
severe blow is
اللي هي
that the
المال
road to
الحاجة
Medina
المهم
is
جدا.
cut
لكن
off.
الضربة
Now
الثانية
let's
إنها
have
إيه؟
a
انقطع الطريق إلى المدينة. لما ينقطع الطريق إلى المدينة، سؤال بقى
question, a
مسلي،
kind of quiz. If you're sitting in
وأنت
Dar
في هذا
al
الندوة
Nadwa thinking with the
المحيطة
Quraysh,
مع
what
قريش
step can you
إنه
take after
يختاروا
losing these battles and confrontations?
وتخسر
A
هذه
truce?
المعارك
What truce,
والمناصرات،
I
إيه
ka?
إيه الخطوة اللي ممكن تعملها بعد كده؟ ها؟ هدنة؟ إيه؟ مش
And
سامع.
hear you, how can I keep the
إزاي؟
problem to myself? I'll keep it to everyone. I tried doing that with Banu Sulaim
طب ما
and
احنا عملناها
Gadafin,
قبل
but they
كده
still
مع
attacked
بني
their
نذير
neighbors.
وغطفان،
Okay, does
أرادوا
anyone have other
إخراج
solutions? I
المسلمين من
ka?
ديارهم. حرب. تمام. حد عنده حلول أخرى؟ مش
And
سامع
hear
حاجة.
anything? Oh, there is, look for the reason for the leak. Yes, look for the reason for the leaks. Go ahead, but what is this political decision you're talking about? It's a security decision if you want to see it. But what am I going to do next? Syria? Yes, what am I going to do in Syria? How am I going to reach it? Yes, but he can't. The road to Medina is cut off and the road to Najd is cut off, so everything the northern region is closed off to the Meccans. Folks, you're completely useless as politicians. No, one in Quraysh will seek your help, but the polytheists are weak. The right solution is war. You're facing an obstacle now and you've tried to circumvent it, but failed. So what should you do? You absolutely must devise and plan for a major war, and that's what will happen, God.
لابد أن تدبر وتخطط لحرب كبيرة، وهذا الذي سيكون إن شاء الله في غزوة إيه؟ غزوة أحد.
Willing in the
طيب.
Battle of Uhud. Now
لكن
let
هنا
me
أقف
pause
مع
here
نقطة
briefly. How did
بسيطة.
the
كيف
news
تسرب
leak?
الخبر؟
Because Sheikh
عشان
Tariq is
نقدر
focused on those who
نركز مع
leaked the
الموضوع أكتر.
news. The story of the leak is found in a
حقيقة
weak
هو
narration by Al-Waqidi.
الرواية
What
تسريب
happened,
الخبر
of course, we
وردت
know
في
that some
كثير من
people in
المصادر،
Medina had
وهو إيه اللي حصل؟ طبعا احنا عارفين انه اهل المدينة كان فيهم من لم يسلم، و
and converted to Islam. One of these
فوجدوا هؤلاء
non-Muslims
الذين
was
لم
named
يسلموا
Naim ibn Masad
اكتشفوا
al-Ashjai.
نعيم بن
This
مسعود
man was in Mecca and heard about the
هذا الرجل
caravan. They
كان في
kept the
مكة.
caravan secret to
تمام.
prevent the news from
وسمع نبأ
leaking, but he
القافلة
was in Mecca and heard
وخطط
about
خطط
it.
يتكتم
The
عليها لكي لا يتسرب الخبر، لكن هو كان في مكة وسمع نبأ القافلة، والراجل كان قاعد عادي. بعد كده رجع المدينة، كان
man
في
was
بني
just sitting
النضير
there after,
في
so he
مجلس
returned
شراب
to
وسكر
Medina
ولهو،
and found himself in a gathering of Banu
وفي
Nadir
هذا
drinking and
المجلس اللي هو في
intoxication.
ذلك الوقت
At
لم
that
يكن الخمر
time,
قد حرمت،
wine was not yet prohibited.
وفي هذا
Also
المجلس
present was a
جاء
companion named Layth
صحابي
ibn
اسمه
al-Naman.
سليط بن النعمان. الناس اللي بتحب يعني تعتصر أخبار السيرة تقول
Those
إن
who like to
سيدنا
delve into the
رضي الله
details of the
عنها
Prophet's
أحد
biography
عناصر
say that
جهاز
this
المخابرات
Layth ibn
الإسلامية
al-Numan was a member of the
لتجهيزات
Islamic
الانقلاب في
intelligence
بني النضير.
apparatus tasked with
فرضي الله
monitoring the
عنه
situation in
دخل في
Banu
الشام
Nadir. He joined them
وخدم
and their
الملك.
drinking party.
فلما
When
سمع
Naim ibn
نائم
Masud
بمصالحها
al-Ashjay became
أفلت
drunk,
منه
he blurted out
وهو في
news
صدد
about the caravan.
خبر
Layth ibn
الخطر.
al-Numan quickly relayed it
فسبحان
to the
طار
Prophet,
به
peace and
إلى النبي
blessings
صلى
be
الله عليه
upon
وسلم
him.
سيدنا صليط بن
The
النعمان
Prophet then tasked
وكلفه
Zayd ibn
بزيد بن حارثة
Haritha with handling the
وأمر
matter. Some say that it's not
بمهمته.
necessarily true that
وبعض الناس يقول لا، يعني ليس شرطا أن يكون سيدنا صليط هو يعني عنصر في مؤسسة اسمها الجيش
Layth was
الأمني،
part of an institution,
ولكن
called the
طبيعة
security
كل
apparatus, but
مرحلة
rather that it was
سياسية
natural for any
ونبي الله
Muslim
ورسوله
companion loyal to
أن
God and
يحدث
his
خبرا
messenger too,
مهما
no important news
يريد
that
أن
could benefit other
يتأكد
Muslims,
المسلمون
following their
فيضع به
pre-Islamic custom of
على
attending
عاتق
drinking
شخص
parties. When he
المرأة
heard the
التي
news,
تحتوي
he
مجالس
went
العقد
and conveyed it to
وتسمع
the
الخبر
Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him.
وذهب
The
فنقله إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. أيا ما كان الأمر، المهم من المعلومة وصلت. إن صحت
important
هذه
thing was that
الرواية
the
يعني لو
information
وجدت
reached us
رواية
if
على هذا
this account
القول
is
غير ظاهر
authentic.
الواقع
I mean, what
فهذه
kind of account is this? It
مذمة
was
حرمة
narrated by
لها
al-Waqidi, and
وتكذيب
al-Waqidi is
للرسول.
considered unreliable in
وهو
hadith
موضوع
transmission, but
معروف
he is a
يعني
reliable
في
source for historical
أهل
accounts.
الجرح والتعديل
Al-Waqidi is a
والترجيح.
well-known figure among
فمن أين
scholars of
وصل
hadith
الخبر إلى
criticism and
النبي صلى الله
hadith
عليه وسلم؟ وها
transmission.
هنا
It was through him
نكمل
that
هذه العملية
the news reached the Prophet, peace
التي
and
أدت
blessings
إلى
be upon
تضليل
him, and it
النبي
was through him
وإضلال
that
المشركين.
this operation was carried out, which led to the cutting off of
جميل.
this route for the polytheists.
الآن
Now
لو
let's
أننا
pray for
نريد
the
أن
Prophet. If we want to summarize the most important
أهم
aspects
ما
or
تم
results of the
توجيهه
pre-Islamic military campaigns,
أو
we
أهم
mentioned,
النتائج
of
التي
course, the development
استنتجها
of the
قبل أحد،
Islamic intelligence
ذكرنا
apparatus
هنالك
and the development
مسألة
of
تطور جهاز المخابرات الإسلامي وتطور الجاهزية الإسلامية، لكن أهم ما في هذا من الآثار السياسية يا
Islamic
جماعة
preparedness, but the most
هو
important political
نفوذ
impact, my friends, is the
المسلمين في
influence and
دولة
prestige of the
إسلامية.
Muslims which
لك أن
spread.
تتخيل
Imagine a
دولة
state that
نشأت
was
قبل
established 2
200
years ago and has remained
وظلت
so.
الآن
Now, at the beginning of the
مطمع
second year, we are in
السامية.
Jumada
ونحن
al-Akhira.
الآن
At
في
the
جماد الآخرة.
beginning of the second year, it has
ونحن في
achieved
المطمع الثاني
military
الذي
results,
خطط في
including
ذلك
breaking the
السياق،
nose of the
ومنها غزو
Quraysh and
أنف قريش، ومنها مهاجمة القبائل التي تفكر في مهاجمتها في
attacking
أرض
tribes that
ديارها
were thinking
وفي
of
قطع
attacking it in their own territory, thus cutting off the Quraysh's route. Victory in general creates a state of influence. This influence creates a situation of turning enemies into neutrals or neutrals into allies,
أو نقل المحايدين إلى حلفاء، أو إلقاء الرعب في العدو بدل ما العدو كان شايفك
or instilling fear in the enemy. Instead of the enemy seeing you as a mere morsel, as Abu Jahl used to say, now the enemy sees you as a great matter, something that should be taken into serious consideration. The spread of the Muslims' prestige in these regions allowed them to enjoy a period of security for 5 months, meaning that we would not see anyone thinking of attacking the Muslims until the month of Shawwal. This is a well-known and established principle in politics, that victory creates allies. If you want to learn about something like this, have you heard of someone named Alexander Dugin? Have you heard of someone named Alexander Dugin, the Russian thinker? This Russian thinker used to write, if we have money in Russia, should we invest it in industries and the production of refrigerators, washing machines and such, or should we invest it in wars and weapons? He said, invest it in wars and weapons. This is what creates allies for us, and this is what will make us prosper economically later. We will meet you, God willing, in the next meeting. I ask God Almighty to teach us what benefits us, to make what He has taught us beneficial to us, and to increase our knowledge. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. Music.